Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a live edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I don't know how live it is, but at least we are live as opposed to pre-recorded at this point. And this is the first time in 2 weeks that we've been able to do a live program, and I am so excited about being back with you. I've missed this tremendously. I've been telling Bob, and of course the issue, the technical issue with Frontier, it's just unbelievable when your whole world revolves around the internet and they tell you it's down, we're not going to get it fixed for a week or 10 days or whatever it happens to be. Just seems unbelievable in this day and age, but I guess that's what we're dealing with. But we are back, and it is a pleasure to be with you on this beautiful, beautiful Wednesday. Today is the 21st day of September in the year 2016. We are moving closer and closer to the fall elections. We're within the framework, the 2-month framework now. We're down to about 50 days, or give or take a couple of days, and I'm pursuing my own campaign of sorts, I guess. I'm kind of fumbling my way through, but I'm doing the best that I know how to do. And so I've not been idle while we've not been doing these broadcasts, but I have to tell you how much I miss them. And I miss the interaction. I miss the idea of the challenge to be on every day and put together a program that seems to make sense every day. And today's program, on Mondays, oftentimes we end up doing a program which, for lack of a better term, I've called This, That, and the Other, because in the 5 days that we are off the air between Wednesdays and Mondays, a lot can happen, and there's usually 3 or 4 issues to deal with, and they usually end up taking up a good portion of Monday's 2-hour program. So now we've been off for 2 weeks, and of course there are a number of those issues that have occurred over the last couple of weeks, terrorist attacks and more shootings, and the riots in Charlotte last night with yet another shooting, and it goes on and on. Hillary's near passing out, if you remember, on 9/11, and the fallout from that, and the fact that the first debate is next Monday night. A lot of people thought it would never come. Now it's coming, and obviously the polls indicate that Donald Trump has moved ahead in a number of these key states. And Bob and I were chatting before we went on the air about it's hard to believe, but it just almost seems like the more ammunition that you get to discredit Donald Trump's candidacy, his qualifications for the presidency, the higher his polls go. So it almost seems we're working in an inverse proportion here. And in fact, I think we've kind of suggested in previous programs that indeed maybe we are. I would love to hear from you after all of this time, to just know that there are some folks out there. We would love to hear from you and get your thoughts on some of these ideas. I have a number of issues today, but obviously if we do get a call from one of our listeners, that automatically becomes the priority item. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-4676. If you'd like to drop an email to me and share your thoughts that way, I would really appreciate hearing from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W.A. O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N 906 at gmail.com. And I mention again our Facebook page, and I hope that many of you have been looking at our Facebook page. There have been a number of items posted since last we were together here at the Virtual Center. If you are a regular user of Facebook, you just go to the home page, and at the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. And many of you know, of course, that I am engaged in a political campaign of my own for the House of Delegates here in West Virginia. And in pursuit of that, I have started a campaign Facebook page. And I know many people are looking at that, and I've been posting those things that seem most appropriate for that particular Facebook page, the campaign. Sometimes I can't make up my mind. I put them on both. And then I have a personal page as well. And usually when I post something on the Virtual Center page, it eventually ends up on my personal page as well. The folks at Facebook just transfer it over. So at first I was putting it on both pages at the same time, and I was finding out that I was double posting. So I stopped that, and I know that if I put it on the Virtual Center page, it'll go on my personal page, but not the campaign page. So if I'm going to put anything on that, I have to do that as well. So on the campaign page, if you just go to William A. O'Brien, candidate for the West Virginia House of Delegates, you'll see the campaign page. And of course, there's nothing on the campaign page. I don't believe that's not on the Virtual Center page. Anything that is politically related that would seem appropriate for the campaign. If I put it on the Virtual Center page, I usually put it on the other one as well. But operating with three different pages, it kind of sometimes becomes a little bit confusing, but that's okay. I think part of the problem is that as I get older, I find that things become more and more confusing anyway. So, but again, it is a pleasure to be back with you today here at the Virtual Center. It's a pleasure for me to recognize that Bob and the folks at Head On are back on the air, and that we're hopefully moving towards some semblance of normalcy, at least here within the Head On Radio Network community, and in my case, that portion of it that relates to the Virtual Center. So with that, then, I'd like to touch on a number of issues that are rather contemporary and up to date. And the first thing I have to say, and I posted this on the on Facebook last night because I couldn't pass up the opportunity to sign on, to share, and thereby to endorse and put my name to the performance of Elizabeth Warren in the United States Senate yesterday in her questioning of the CEO of Wells Fargo. It was on all the media outlets. I'm sure many of you have seen it. What I hope you had the good fortune to do is see the entire tape, because the networks naturally cut portions of it and just put the particular parts that they think are the most appropriate. The fact of the matter is the entire presentation on her part was appropriate. I put on the Facebook page that it, for me, was an honor to just put my name on the Facebook page so that I could participate in sharing the video of that testimony. I think it will go down as one of the greatest performances that we've seen in the United States Senate for a long time. As an aside, I really do believe that if Elizabeth Warren was on the ticket, I think the polling would be quite different. Because I don't care whether you're a supporter of Hillary or we're a supporter of Bernie Sanders or whether you're a Trump supporter. I think in this particular case, Elizabeth Warren was speaking for everybody when she talked in her questioning about the unfairness of a system which would arrest and prosecute and probably move for prison time for a cashier who took a fistful of $20 bills from the cash drawer. And yet what Mr. Stump did as CEO for Wells Fargo was in many ways so much worse, so much bigger, so much more astounding, and hurt so many more people. And yet, as Elizabeth Warren pointed out, these folks never seem to go to jail. The people that report to them never seem to go to jail. And as I was watching it, I got to tell you, I was just captivated by her presentation. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking about the sources I've read on the South Sea bubble in the early 18th century in England. And exactly the same kind of thing happened. That was one, at that time, it was probably the first and most prominent example of an international financial scam that we had in the modern world. Members of Parliament were intricately involved in that particular scam. A lot of people were wiped out financially. People who put everything they had into what they were convinced and what people they trusted told them was a sure thing. And the fact of the matter is it was a house of cards and it collapsed. Many people were hurt. Many people were devastated, were rendered bankrupt. But nobody in a position of prominence went to jail. And that seemed to establish the principle that goes on all the way up until today. And that it almost seems that the bigger the scam, the safer are its perpetrators. If you haven't had the opportunity to go online and listen to Elizabeth Warren's performance in the Senate yesterday, you have a treat coming. I would encourage you to do it. I think it was absolutely astounding. And of course, the fact of the matter is there were really substantive recommendations that Elizabeth Warren made. And basically what she said was, until these people who are responsible for orchestrating these things start going to jail and being held responsible for what they do, until that happens, we're not going to stop it. I think she was not speaking so much to the CEO of Wells Fargo at that time. She was talking to other members of the Senate. And the implication of what she was saying is, if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? I would not have been, well, I shouldn't say that. It seemed very appropriate that other members of the Senate committee would break out in applause. They didn't. For a moment, I forgot that it was the United States Senate. And I really did expect to hear applause because her presentation was that solid, was that good. Then I realized it was the United States Senate. It wouldn't happen. And then I realized who some of the others are sitting on those committees, and I understood well why it didn't happen. But the fact of the matter is, it was pretty powerful. And of course, one of the things that she points, not to get into all of the details, but one of the things she points out, and this is the part that I think it's important to see, in many of the media, many of the major network presentations cut this portion out. And that was her presentation dealing with the amount of money that this particular individual made by perpetrating a scam that drove up the value of Wells Fargo's stock. And when this whole thing started, she pointed out, he personally held 6 million shares plus of Wells Fargo stock. And the result of this scam was to increase the price of Wells Fargo stock to at approximately $30 a share, which for him personally resulted in a $200 million profit, net profit, in the stock he already held. So the fact of the matter is, it was not so much the people that were hurt by the scam, whose credit ratings, who were being subjected to fees for accounts that they didn't ask for and all the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is, this was more an example of fraud. It was not directly aimed at hurting people. It was more aimed at inflating the value of stock in order to benefit the major stockholders. And of course, the CEO was the major stockholder of all. It was an incredible, incredible experience. And I think all of us need to keep this in mind as we think about the election. Because I think it's very, I think what we're looking at is very important. At the same time, the same day that this is going on, of course, the reports about Donald Trump's use of his own foundation funds to pay off penalties and fines and judgments and all of legal judgments and all the rest of it seem to me to be so obvious. But on the other hand, I guess to the people to whom these things become obvious, the reasons to vote for Donald Trump aren't that, must somehow Trump, pun intended, Trump, the negatives. But whatever, I had to open today's program by at least mentioning the Elizabeth Warren presentation in the Senate yesterday. I thought it was just absolutely astounding. As a candidate for political office, and I kind of knew that this kind of thing happened, but I didn't appreciate the extent to which it happened. And that is that interest groups, when you are an announced candidate for office, interest groups naturally try to enlist you in particular causes that benefit the group to which they belong. I mean, that's really the way, in many ways, the so-called the way the system works, so to speak, is that those particular interest groups who spend money employing lobbyists in state capitals and all the rest of it are very interested in enlisting support from prospective members of state legislatures. And so therefore, as a candidate, you're constantly receiving mail from these particular interest groups seeking your support. And what they promise you is endorsement. If you answer their questions the right way, in other words, if you go on record as being committed to their particular point of view, then the reward you get is their endorsement. And what that means is that during your campaign, you can basically, in your advertising, you can basically inform voters, prospective voters, that you've been endorsed by this group, that group, and the other group. And of course, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the particular groups that endorse a particular candidate, you can pretty well tell on the left to right political spectrum where that particular candidate lies. In other words, you can tell if all the endorsements for this particular candidate are from unions and organized labor and teachers and public employee groups and all the rest of it, then you can pretty well tell that this particular candidate, if he or she is elected, is going to vote a particular way on, it can be expected to vote a particular way on issues. Sometimes these endorsements come with actual financial contributions, with a check. And given the costs of conducting a campaign, that's very important. It's not illicit. And I think that's one of the things that I took some time on several weeks ago, because I have received financial support from a number of particular groups. That doesn't mean that I sold out my soul, that I've sold my soul. Because in a couple of cases, I have had to tell these groups that I welcome their support, but on the other hand, all I can commit to is that I will be fair and as honest as I can in making decisions, and that I will resist making decisions on issues without consulting the people most directly involved. In fact, one group asked me specifically, if we endorse you and make a financial contribution to your campaign, will you vote our way on particular issues that relate directly to us? And I had to say, I can't commit to that. I will consult you. I will seek your input in the particular piece of legislation, and I will weigh it along with information from other sources as I make the decision on what would seem to be the most appropriate vote for me to cast. I'm very willing to do that because I think that's what representative government requires. But to actually commit to vote in a particular way is something that I cannot endorse. So in this sense, as I think back historically, I'm supporting a little more, a more conservative position on representation than others. Because, it seems to me that if you merely are the agent of constituent groups within your district or political constituency, then they are the ones who get to cast the ballot. And chances are their vote is going to be against the interests of other groups and individuals within your constituency. And that always needs to be weighed. And so in that sense, these endorsements are very important because it costs money to run a campaign. And I think we're seeing that in the state level campaigns as well as on the national level as to how much it takes to advertise and to get your position out and all the rest of it, to print cards and signs and take out ads in newspapers and on and on and on. A number of these questionnaires or groups soliciting endorsement are soliciting my particular position on issues in exchange for the endorsement of that group. Some of them I know straight up that philosophically and in terms of principle and everything else, I cannot and would not support. So in some of the cases, I just don't even bother responding, because if I'm out and out opposed to a particular issue or a particular interest group, then I just don't respond. And one of those groups, I just received this a few days ago. One of the groups in question is a group called the Family Policy Council. I know a number of candidates who have been endorsed by this particular group. And some of the activities of this particular group are activities that I cannot endorse, that I cannot condone. This is not a group whose endorsement I would seek, because the only way I would get that endorsement would be to commit to things that violate most all of the principles and values that I stand for and that I've grown up believing in. So the fact of the matter is, I made the decision to not respond to the questionnaire. But in thinking about coming on the air here at the Virtual Center, I thought the questionnaire would be informative for other people, just to hear the kinds of questions that these groups pose. This particular questionnaire is not that long. Some of them are extremely long. A couple of them that I have responded to have taken well over an hour to respond to, because in many cases they're not short answers. They're not yes and no's. These groups want your position on how would you act in this particular situation, how would you vote in this particular situation, and why. And those things take time. I know that I answered some questions in the area of civil justice and some of the civil justice reforms that are coming before the state legislature here in this particular state in West Virginia, and have done that over the last year or two, and I'm looking at some of the issues. And so, those issues require some substantial explanation and rationale. I would do this, but I wouldn't do that because, et cetera, et cetera. And it takes time to do that. This particular one was all short answers. And basically, you were given two choices. You either agree or disagree with the particular statement, and there are 10 of those statements. And I thought it might be interesting for everybody to get a sense of how these questionnaires work and what they might say. I think by the very questions, by the very statements, you can pretty well deduce the priorities of this particular group. You know that if you are a supporter of this particular group, it's because you're willing to agree to most of these statements. And so once you think about what these statements are, I think you get a pretty good idea as to where the particular group's position is on many of these issues. So with that, let me share with you a couple of these. The first statement says the following: Arizona and Nevada recently passed laws creating new public school funding choices. I support creating a similar education savings account so parents could choose to send their child to any public, private, religious, or homeschool without paying twice like they do now. Agree or disagree? And for those of you who might benefit from just a comment or two, obviously this particular position or issue relates to the idea that if people choose to pull their children out of public school and put them in a private school, a religious school, or homeschool them or whatever, as citizens, these people still pay taxes that go to support of the public schools. Consequently, their feeling is that they are being taxed double. They're supporting public schools, which they've chosen not to participate in, not to send their kids to, and they're incurring the costs of yet another school system that they choose to place their child in. So they're getting hit twice financially, as it were. And they would like to be relieved of that by saying that if you don't support the public schools and if you don't want your child going there and you're going to pull your child out and send that child to another school, a private school, then you should be excused from that portion of your taxes which go to support the public school system. And they want to know whether I agree or disagree with that statement. Obviously, I disagree. But on the basis of that one issue, I'm not willing to discount this particular interest group or to trash the survey. There are 9 more questions. The second question: I am pro-life and oppose abortions on any baby that would stop a fetal heartbeat. Agree or disagree? So there are the first 2 questions. So already, I've pretty well concluded what this particular interest group, if I didn't know, and I already did, because I know some people who have been endorsed by this particular group, and I've also seen some of the handiwork in very specific examples. So my inclination when I received it was not even to open it. But I did. And once I saw it, I thought that the benefit of this might be best revealed by sharing some of these questions with you. I think one of the things that you can obviously already note about this particular survey is that items 1 and 2 seem to be totally unrelated to each other. The issue of abortion as opposed to the issue of supporting public schools. But you can obviously begin to see the ideological direction in which the agrees, if you agree with these statements, are taking you. The third question or statement: city anti-discrimination ordinances should be expanded beyond the Supreme Court's definition of immutable traits like race, so that they also protect sexual practices and transgender behavior. Let me read that again, because this is a question where, in order to agree with the group that put the questionnaire together, you would have to disagree with this. In other words, this requires that you give it some thought. Anti-discrimination ordinances in cities should be expanded beyond the Supreme Court's definition of immutable traits like race, so that they also protect sexual practices and transgender behavior. In other words, what they're asking you is, do you support cities that pass specific legislation protecting things like gays and transgender people and that kind of thing? And of course, if you are in agreement with this particular group, then you will disagree with that statement, because you don't believe that cities ought to pass these protections for these particular groups other than the more obvious ones like race. So therefore, you would have to disagree with this statement. Number 4, I support a business owner's right to publicly or privately express traditional beliefs about marriage without fearing loss of state or government contracts. This obviously deals with the issue of same-sex marriage and the idea of your particular religious beliefs. If you believe that participating in a particular activity or business activity would violate your religious principles, then the question is, should your religious principles take a priority, and should you be excused from the need to do that? Should you be penalized for denying your services to particular individuals based on who they are or who they love? And I think the answer between agree and disagree there is obvious. Number 5, I would vote for a bathroom safety law that restores common sense and prevents the state from requiring private businesses to allow men into bath and locker room facilities marked for women. This new act would also protect the privacy and dignity of our public school students. This relates to the situation in North Carolina and the so-called bathroom law that's getting so much attention. And they basically want to know if you would be a supporter of that law or would be an opponent of it. Number 6, physician-assisted suicide should be legal in West Virginia, yes or no, agree or disagree. That's number 6 of 10. The point is, if you think back to the 6 questions, school choice and taxation, pro-life and a position on abortion, specific municipal legislation protecting particular groups other than on the basis of race, the issue of a business's right to deny services to people whose lifestyle they disagree with, physician-assisted suicide. It seems to me that if you put those 6 items together, you're getting a pretty good idea of the philosophical or ideological bent of this particular group. And since we have this in our hand, let me share with you the last couple of questions quickly. The state or cities should force business owners to use their professional skill and assets to affirm speech and participate in events, even if doing so violates sincerely held beliefs. Example, requiring a pro-life real estate owner to rent to Planned Parenthood, or requiring a pacifist insurance agent to cover an NRA gun show, or requiring a Christian vocalist to sing love songs at a same-sex wedding reception. In other words, should government have the right to force you to be able to force you to do things as a business person that violates your personal values and principles? And of course, this gets into the issue, the issue in Kentucky, if you remember, of the woman that would not issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Number 8, the sale of marijuana for recreation created jobs in Colorado, so I would legalize pot in West Virginia too. In other words, is the issue of jobs and income that the state would realize from legalized marijuana worth legalizing it? Number 9, I support a statewide ballot vote giving our citizens opportunity to hold referendums so local voters may approve or disapprove any city ordinances that exceed federal and state law, especially ordinances creating new legal burdens for businesses. This ties in with the other ones about requiring businesses, if they serve the public, to offer their services to everybody on a non-discriminatory basis. And number 10, West Virginia is not only a place for corporations to make a buck, it's the place where we make our life. 93% of likely voters support religious freedom. 75% say they're more likely to support a candidate that does too. If elected, I will represent their will and vote for last session's House version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and give our citizens needed protections against state overreach that 21 other states have approved. Agree or disagree? And that is the 10. I think you get a pretty good idea as to the agenda of this particular group vis-a-vis the upcoming legislative session as well as the past one. These folks are looking for candidates who, if elected, will commit to vote a certain way on the issues that they care most about. These are, we know, in a lot of cases, spin-off issues of prospective legislation drafted by outside special interest groups like the American Legislative Exchange Council. All of this plays into the desire to lock up the legislative chambers in order to drive home an agenda, an ideological agenda that will materially change and philosophically change the state and the environment in which we all live. Many of these things, it seems to me, directly violate the rights and principles we have under the Constitution of the United States. If there's any reason in the world why we all ought to be cognizant of the efforts to call for a constitutional convention under Article 5, under the ruse of approving a balanced budget amendment, these questions reveal the hidden agenda of such an Article 5 convention. This particular document, on one page, it seems to me, summarizes what the issues are. Not only in this particular election campaign here in this state, but in the election campaigns in other states as well. This morning, I was looking on the internet and I happened to pick up a website that kind of offered a conclusion or a summation, if you will, of legislative sessions around the country, kind of compiling the evidence on the issues that these particular legislatures throughout the nation approved, didn't approve, or tried to approve. And this particular document seems to me to capture much of that legislation. This document reflects the priorities of a group of people that is engaged in potentially the ideological takeover of our constitutional system by doing it one state at a time. This particular website that I looked at this morning pointed out that 70% of the state legislatures seem to be, given these kinds of issues, seem to be under the control of conservative interests. Something over 50%, not quite 70, something over 50% suggests that these people control the entire mechanism of government in a number of states. In other words, the 70% includes states that legislatures control, but they don't control the governorship yet. But this is the agenda. This is what this fall election's about. Let me be kind of, and try to bring this to a logical conclusion. This particular document is the reason I chose to run for office. I can't defeat it by myself. I'm not naive enough to believe that. But I also know that I'm running against an individual who does subscribe to many of these issues. And so the mere fact that I could deny a positive vote on these issues by winning this particular seat, for me, is reason enough to try. Now, again, if in the process, if I can influence other people to begin to see the folly of their ways, so to speak, in the process, that would be great. But at least this one particular legislative seat will be out to oppose this particular agenda. Let me point out something else that it seems to me specifically very important and applies particularly to this particular program here at the Virtual Center. And that is the whole idea of the Constitution of the United States. This particular document and the ideology that it reflects violates the basic principles of the constitutional system that the founders gave us. By signing on, by agreeing to these issues, you are basically saying that you are not going to adhere to the will and the issues of your constituents. That instead, you are going to be governed. How you vote is going to be dictated by your commitment to vote according to the priorities of these particular interest groups. You are basically allowing outside interest groups to define your stance as an elected representative, which means that you have decided to let them tell you how to vote rather than consult your own constituency in order to find out what they want. Now, the reality is, and of course, I'm talking in West Virginia, so the reality is, chances are many of the constituents, many of the citizens who live in this particular legislative district would support many of these issues. But that doesn't mean that I must. It means that as a leader and an educator and a representative, part of my job is not to hold my nose while I cast a vote for something that I don't agree with. Rather, my job is to do the best I can to help people see that there is more to this particular issue than these people might currently believe or recognize. And one of the things that James Madison talked about in the Federalist Papers in more than one place is the responsibility of these elected representatives to educate the citizenry on the issues, to make them see things that they don't currently see or that they refuse to see, and to help them to come to understand and appreciate the complexities of some of these issues in the kind of society in which we live. That's an elected representative's job in a representative democracy like this one. That's what this republic is all about. And Madison believed, and others believed, that the effectiveness of Republican government is the interaction, the back and forth contact between elective representatives and constituents. This particular document asks a candidate literally to sell his soul or her soul by committing to an ideological agenda which denies your constituents the opportunity to have any influence over how you vote at all. You choose to let this particular agenda be the only influence that you will listen to. That means that you are violating your own oath of office. You are violating the constitutional principles on which this government is founded. It's this kind of thing, it seems to me, that I think all of us need to become more aware of and need to become committed to combat. Many of the questionnaires and surveys like this that you get when you announce for office are one-issue questionnaires, not ideological agendas like this. These questions touch on issues that are unrelated one to the other except for the ideological perspective that they reveal. So in essence, by agreeing to the majority of these issues, you are agreeing to vote according to an ideological agenda. You are basically saying, I am not going to look at evidence. I'm not going to look at what my constituents want. I'm not going to look at what I believe is best for my district, my region, my citizens, my state, or my nation. I'm going to vote according to this particular agenda. That's going to be the marching orders under which I operate. And by asking people to sign on to this agenda in exchange for the endorsement of this group, this is an effort to build an autonomous, organic, functioning political team of members, all of whom are committed to vote according to an agenda compiled by out-of-state interests, who care nothing about West Virginia citizens or what they believe or what they need or the standard of living that they find themselves in or the need for jobs or economic development or anything else. What drives these people is this agenda. It's an ideological agenda that runs contrary to the Constitution of the United States, to the ideals and values and principles and vision of the founders of this nation. That's why I wanted to share this particular 10-question survey with you. It's one of many I've received, but it may be the most telling, or one of the most telling, of all such surveys and questionnaires that I have received in this campaign so far. That's why I present it. Over the last week, while we've been off the air here at the Virtual Center, I've been trying to put together my own position papers on issues. In other words, I've been trying to identify and to define more precisely the particular campaign principles or agenda under which or around which I want to organize my particular campaign. I don't want my campaign to be a negative one. I don't want people to vote for me because I'm opposed to this and opposed to that and against this and against that. I want people to know what I am for, what I stand for, and what I hope I can help make happen. At the same time, there's no question that in order to do that, you've got to combat some of this stuff. You can't do one without the other. So in that sense, it's negative. But on the other hand, my sense or my view of negative campaigning in its worst form is personal negative campaigning. In other words, it's not your opposition to the issues and the particular positions on issues that your opponent takes. But it's when the campaign descends into personal attacks on the character of your opponents. I think probably that's what bothers people most of all about the presidential election this year, is that the negatives on both major candidates are so high that voters are being almost put in the position of being asked to choose the lesser of two evils. And the worst part of it is that once you're convinced that your own negatives are high, then your goal becomes not to improve your negatives, but to increase the negatives of your opponent. In other words, if I can successfully make my opponent look worse to voters than they see me, then I'm a positive. I mean, it's unbelievable when you think about it. But it's personal. This campaign for president has become extremely personal. It's dirty. It's filled with untruth and half-truth and misstatement and misinformation and all the rest of it. And really, I think that there's been so much evidence that this campaign is filled with so much untruth, so much misinformation, contradiction, and personal attack, that most voters are just worn out. They're overwhelmed by so much negative evidence, and they're extremely disenchanted. The danger, of course, is that they will get so disenchanted that they won't participate, they won't vote at all. And the implication is, while the negatives on both candidates are high, it seems to me important to realize that that doesn't mean that all citizens see both candidates the same way. There is a difference between the two. And I really believe that all of us need to hope that enough people will recognize that difference to avoid the pitfalls that would befall us if people didn't see those differences. But what this material indicates, and we're right at the top of the hour, so I just want to, before we take our break, I just kind of want to end this with kind of a lead-in or a transition, if you will, into our second hour. What we've uncovered here in this first hour, it seems to me, is a dichotomy or a distinction based on the principles of representative government. We have, in effect, revealed the contradiction between the ideals and the realities of representative government. A government that, on the one hand, is based on the principle of representatives being able to put aside self-interest in favor of the public interest, and to vote as individuals, to vote as concerned, principled, fair, honest citizens, versus the realities, the political realities of the political party system, which is designed to encourage people to vote as a team, to vote in lockstep, to basically put aside their own individual issues and concerns in the interests of the group to which they belong. There's a basic contradiction here. I'd like to take some time in our second hour today to expand a little bit on that particular contradiction. It's 2 minutes after the hour. We're going to pause, take our 5-minute break as we usually do on our Monday and Wednesday programs. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to be right back after a short break. I know Bob has some music ready to go for the interlude. I hope you'll stay with us. And by all means, if this particular issue is one that you feel you have something that others could benefit from, by all means, use this opportunity to call in and get on the air. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Bob Kincaid, and welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility on this beautiful Wednesday. It is the 21st day of September in the year 2016. We are back on the air after a hiatus of almost 2 weeks, I believe, and I'm enjoying it. I hope, I trust that you are as well. We are in our second hour. If you are just joining us, welcome. We have been talking about some of the more prominent issues of the day, issues that relate to the mission of the Virtual Center, which is the idea of the study, meaning, and intent behind the Constitution of the United States and its interpretation, its ability to guide this nation politically. And we focused on some of the issues that seem to be surfacing during the campaigns, both at the national level and at the state level as well. And the last major issue that we dealt with in our first hour was a 10-question survey by an interest group here that was sent to me, which I think reveals the basis of the ideological efforts of interest groups to take over the direction of our nation by going through state legislatures. This questionnaire pretty much, it seems to me, summarizes the ideological glue that holds a particular group of folks together. And that's really what I wanted to focus on. As I mentioned right at the end of the hour, it seems to me that what we are confronting here is a major contradiction in our political system. On the one hand, the founders created a system which requires a specific kind of behavior in order for the nature of representation in this republic to work as it was designed to work. And on the other hand, we have the realities of political parties, of organized interest groups within those parties, what Madison called factions. The fact of the matter is they are diametrically opposed to each other, both in outcome and in procedure. Madison envisioned representatives in our legislatures who would be functioning as enlightened individuals. Individuals able to put aside their own self-interests, to put aside local concerns and the local pressures of politics in order to concentrate their efforts and their abilities on issues of national concern. In other words, he envisioned Congress, the Congress of the United States, as being a meeting of the ways of very intelligent people representing groups from all over the nation, who would be able to put aside their own local priorities in order to take on some of the major national issues and challenges that confronted the nation as a whole. He believed that by definition, differences between delegates would be worked out through conversation, through negotiation, compromise, and that ultimately what individuals in these positions of influence would be able to do would be to put aside, identify, and put to one side the issues that divided them in order to concentrate on accomplishing the things that they could agree on, irrespective of their differences. By definition, parties function contrary to that. And that's really the theme that I'd like to pursue in this, our second hour. I would love to hear from you. I know our other listeners would as well. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me in an email, we can get it on in our next program. If you send me an email, it's waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And again, there's our Facebook page. Just go to the homepage of Facebook, and in the search box at the top, type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. And there are a number of postings there, a number of articles that I've called your attention to that I think make points that all of us would be well worth taking the time to reflect upon and consider. I also advise you or mention that besides the Virtual Center Facebook page, there's also on my, on this particular thing, a link to a campaign Facebook page that I have put together. And all you need to do is type in William A. O'Brien, candidate for the West Virginia House of Delegates, and you'll be onto the campaign page. And I have put a number of items, postings, on both pages, so that if you go to one, you're basically covering the second as well. I mentioned that during the time we've been off the air, which is actually a couple of weeks, I spent some time trying to put together my own position on some what I think are relevant issues. And basically, what I'm trying to do is more precisely define my particular candidacy so that voters will basically know what I stand for and what the kinds of things that I would like to do if they are so kind as to honor me with their votes, with enough votes to get in there. And one of the issues that I have focused on, and I have done some writing about, is the very issue that we ended our last hour with, and the issue that I've already mentioned here at the beginning of this second hour as a lead-in. And this is the idea of the contradiction, and it is a real contradiction, between the symmetry of party, the extent to which party wants everybody to vote in lockstep, in tandem, together on particular issues, versus the ideology or the vision, if you will, of individuals thinking, reasoning, and conversing together in order to reach common stands on issues. Let me be kind of specific here and give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's assume that we have a legislature, a chamber somewhere, and I'm just going to make the numbers simple. Let's assume that we have a legislature that is made up of 10 representatives. In order to get something passed, you need 6 out of the 10. So therefore, on a particular issue, in order to get it through, you need at least 6 of the 10 individuals to agree on that particular issue to the point that they're all willing to vote together for it, or vote together as a group against it in order to block it. The issue is the majority. Out of 10, that would be 6. Okay. Out of 20, it would be 11, and on and on and on. All right. The point that I'm trying to make is this. We would like to believe that if 6 of those 10 voted together on a particular issue, it would be because each of those individuals, independently and separately, looked at the issues, did the research, considered the needs and concerns of their own constituencies, their own districts, and reached the conclusion after serious, careful reflection that this particular issue or this particular position on the issue is best for all concerned. The best thing that I can do for my constituents, for my own set of principles and values, etc., is to vote for this particular issue. And 5 other people went through the same process and reached the same conclusion you did. 6 people coming to the same conclusion independently by looking at the evidence, doing the research, communicating with the people with the most information and the most vital interest in that particular issue, taking all of the different inputs into consideration and reaching an independent conclusion, and then going back into the room and finding out that there are 5 other people who went through the same process you did and reached the same conclusion. That's the ideal. That's the dream. That's perfection in terms of the way representative government is envisioned by our founders. That's the system that Madison dreamed about. That's the system he tried to bring about in Federalist Number 10 in order to combat the dangers of faction. Because by definition, faction is totally counter to that particular process. Because in faction, you have the same 6 people voting out of 10 for a particular issue. The difference is that they didn't go through the independent thought and the research and the consulting with most interested people and their own constituents and all the rest of it. They reached their conclusion because they were a member of this particular group, this particular interest group or faction. The 6 people in this group agree on this particular issue, not because of the issue, but because they have agreed to agree. In other words, it's the team idea. That the fact that these people have bought into the principle of functioning as a team, as a faction, in order to get what they want. It suggests that the way they're voting probably benefits their self-interest as they see it. It may not have anything to do with the national interest. It may be counter to the national interest. Let me put this another way. It could be that the way they're voting is contrary to what's right. But it fits their particular agenda, and it also fits the agenda of the team. In other words, the people that I agree with on issues, that I've agreed to work with most of the time, agree that this is the way I want to vote. So I might independently believe that what I'm doing is not right. But what's best for me in this particular situation takes precedence. So in other words, you can have a majority of 6 out of 10 voting for a particular issue. But the key to representative government is how each of those 6 arrived at their position. Did they do it independently, or did they do it because they are an organized team who have agreed to vote together on all the issues, irrespective of what they are, what their constituents want, what they believe to be right? In other words, all these things that ought to take precedence are put on the back burner. And what does take precedence is their self-interest. We know here at the Virtual Center that that's what Madison meant by faction. And Madison basically believed, and this is where the Federalist Papers come in so handy. Madison believed that the greatest danger to popular government was a popular government's tendency to be governed by faction. Madison's whole system of checks and balances and separation of powers is his effort to try to counter or combat faction. His belief that if you can successfully create a system in which no faction can get control because the system is too cumbersome, by creating a system, as Madison says in Federalist 51, of combating interest against interest, ambition against ambition, pitting groups against each other, that what you do is make it impossible for any one group to win the day, to control the process. And what you do instead is you force people to talk, to negotiate, to communicate, to engage in give and take, to reach compromise. The result is that people are learning from each other. And hopefully, according to Madison, eventually the ideal will prevail. That's Madison's Federalist number 10. That's his goal. So in essence, then, we have within the nature of our representative government a major contradiction between faction on the one hand and individual decision-making on the other. We know, of course, that what makes America's two parties unique is that they are not organized interest groups. Instead of having a number of parties, all of them committed to a particular principle on a particular issue, what we have is pluralistic parties combined or composed of various interests, all of whom are willing to cooperate in order to get the candidates elected by getting the majority vote. In other words, the nature of our political system is that it encourages and rewards diversity and compromise. And that's the value of our political system. But the reality is the factionalism that Madison was so worried about is the enemy of this process. Excuse me. And this is really what I wrote about. In Federalist number 49, Madison addressed this issue. I think we've touched on this particular section before here at the Virtual Center, but if we haven't, this is an absolutely beautiful sentence, a beautiful statement of Madison. It's actually a couple of sentences. Madison said, "In a nation of philosophers, reverence for the laws succumbs to the voice of an enlightened reason. But a nation of philosophers is as little to be expected as the philosophical race of kings wished for by Plato." Unquote. In other words, what Madison is saying there is, it would be great if the ideal were the reality. It would be great if we were a nation of philosophers, a nation of thinkers, a nation of rational analysts who went through the process and reached independent conclusions based on their own sense of right and wrong, based on what their conscience tells them is right. The ideal would be that enough people willing to go through that process and to act as philosophers act would come to the same conclusion and then vote together in order to make that conclusion law. But as Madison said, we're not a nation of philosophers. We don't have any more chance of getting that than Plato had of getting his philosopher kings. It's a dream. It's the ideal. It's the pot at the end of the rainbow. It's the goal. It's what we're pointing to, but we'll probably never get to. So in a sense, what Madison is saying is we've got to make some compromises here. We've got to make some adjustments. Basically, we've got to deal with the world as it is, not as the world, as if the world were what we wished it was. Does that make sense? In other words, we're dealing in government here. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with citizens. We're dealing with decisions on major issues. We got to deal with the hand we've been dealt. We can't wish we had 4 aces and act accordingly because we don't have 4 aces. So that's Madison's idea. What makes, and this is one of the things I've written, what makes Madison so worth reading, worth some serious reflection, is that he appreciates some of the hazards or some of the difficulties that all of us confront. Trying to stand for and do what's right when it isn't popular. Heeding the advice of those we respect the most, even when they don't always agree. Remembering that it's not all about us, that there are other people involved here, and there are people who depend on us, need our counsel, our wisdom, our help.
Hey, Bill?
Yes, Bob?
May I jump in for just a second, please?
You certainly can.
I'm hearing what you're saying, and it makes eminently good sense, but I tend to think in parallels. It's a disease. And isn't what you're describing the same argument that we're kind of having over third parties and ideological purity?
Yeah, I think it is, Bob. You go on, clarify that a bit.
Well, I take it as a given that only one of two people are going to win this presidential election. It's either going to be Hillary Clinton or it's going to be Donald J. Trump.
Right. And
if that is the case, then the judgment must be made as to who has the potential to do, not just who has the potential to do greater good, but who has the potential to do greater harm.
Exactly, Bob.
And negatives are not an inspiring electoral strategy,
but they're an important reality.
They are indeed. And so when the group that I refer to as the Sparkle Pony Ideological Purity Brigade comes marching with its kazoos down the street, screaming about how if you vote for the lesser evil, you're still voting for evil, and I'm going to maintain my purity, and I'm going to vote for Jill Stein, and all of this business. They're failing to take into account those people that you just mentioned who have as much or more on the line than others, and potentially doing them manifest harm.
Right.
For instance, a Republican Congress, a Republican House and Senate, and Donald Trump. How much hell on earth could they wreak relative to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act? Here in West Virginia, we have on a per capita basis, as a percentage expression, we have insured more uninsured people than virtually any other state in the union as a result of the Affordable Care Act, and in particular the Medicaid expansion.
Right.
And yet, in this state, you've got people who one, will vote for Donald Trump, who would like nothing better than to take that health care away.
Right.
And you've got a contingent of progressives who are just far too delicate and pure to cast a vote for the woman they refer to as Killery, Shrillery, Hitlery, etc. ad nauseum.
Right.
The argument you're making now is the same argument that has to be made relative to throwing away a vote on a third-party candidate.
Right.
Unless I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. And the point is, you've got to and Madison said that. He said, the ideal's great. I mean, it'd be great if we were a nation of philosophers and everybody went through the process and reached the same conclusion. You could pretty well rely on the fact that innocent, independent thinking, fair people coming to the same conclusion would probably mean that conclusion is the right one. That's the ideal. But the reality is, we're not a nation of philosophers, and we're not going to get to that ideal. So therefore, what we've got to do is deal with the world that is.
And not only are we not a nation of philosophers, we are far from ever being anywhere near a nation of philosophers.
All right, but let me. Can I expand this just a little bit more?
I just wanted to interject that.
Oh no,
simply
you're right.
because of the parallel nature of the argument you were making.
But the nature of the campaign process is that you are trying, as a candidate, you are trying to convince people in your district that you will vote according to their best interests, and that you will make decisions based on right and wrong and good and bad, the things that they would like you to do, and that you are not going to become a prisoner to some agenda written from out some other state. And I'm thinking, of the ALEC group that's put together all of these drafts of legislation. That, in other words, you want your people to believe that you will behave as if you were a philosopher rather than a member of a team. And we continually have this contest or this conflict, because the basic issue is that the whole idea of a smooth functioning team where everybody votes in lockstep and everybody's vote is is predictable. And going in, the minute you know what the issue is, you know how everybody's going to vote based on who they are and what their ideology is and all the rest of it. Then it becomes an effort the political process becomes an effort to organize the strongest team. But in the process, constituents are pretty much left out of the process. There's no way for them to participate in that process. There's no way for them to feel part of that process. And so there's a basic inconsistency, it seems to me, within the system of representative government itself. We want, I'll personalize it because I'm engaged in actually this. I want my constituents to know that if I win, I'm going to vote according to what I believe to be best. For them. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to read and I'm going to listen. I'm going to find out who wants what on a particular issue and why. But included in that, I want to hear from my constituents as well. I want to hear what they want, what they need, and why. And then I want them to believe that after I get all of that information, all of the available information on a particular issue, I'll digest it, I'll filter it, I'll sift it, I'll prioritize it and rank it, and that ultimately I'll make my decision on what would seem to be the best for the people for whom I am directly responsible. That's what I want my constituents to believe I am. What I also, as part of my campaign, have to do is convince these same constituents that my opponent has abandoned that process and that instead he has signed on to a team. He has voted according to a script that is being written from outside the state by special interests who don't have his interests or the people's interests or the state's interest on their radar at all. Their agenda is bigger and different. They see these candidates for office as votes and nothing more than votes, as loyal votes, as predictable votes. They're willing to put up the money to get people elected, provided those people will vote according to the way they're told to vote. And many of these people and my opponents are included in this group, have seemingly signed on to this particular agenda. They have voted for the same ideological position on issues. In other words, if you look at their voting record, the issues become secondary to the ideology behind the issues. It's very similar to the questionnaire, to the survey questions we looked at in the last half of the first hour. Each issue is somewhat different, but each issue is driven by a common ideological perspective. The very phrasing of the statement tells you what this particular group wants to see your answer as. They want to know whether you agree or disagree depending on how the thing is phrased. They want to know whether ideologically you're going to buy in to their ideological set of priorities. If you do, then you're going to vote the same way as other members of this group who have also bought in on issues like on repealing prevailing wage, on right to work, on tax cuts, on refusal to raise taxes, on taking the Grover Norquist pledge never to raise taxes under any conditions whatever, on opioids, on roads and bridges, on public service, on the size of government, on government jobs, on higher education, on cutting school budgets, and on and on and on. All of it is driven by a common, definable, precise ideological agenda. And that's the ideal of our system. It's building a team made up of team players, people who put the best interests of the team first. If you think about the NFL, think about all we're reading and hearing about in the last week or so about Bill Belichick. And Bill Belichick may be the greatest coach ever because of his ability to build a team, because of his ability to get people on that team who are committed, who know their job and do their job. And if something happens and they get hurt, then the next person up fills in and is committed to the same thing. In other words, the driving message is the team and the benefit of the team, not the individuals on it. And we basically salute Belichick for his ability to do that. We celebrate Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and the others for their abilities to do that in business. In politics, we talk about John F. Kennedy's ability to bring together the best and the brightest, FDR's ability to bring together the brain trust, Reagan's ability to build a team around the philosophical principles associated with trickle-down economics. And the key is that once you buy into that ideological perspective, then you cease to function as an individual and you function only as a member of a team. All of that is contradictory to our campaign process. Because in the campaign process, you're trying to convince constituents that their interests are your priority. And if you have signed on to this group, if you signed Grover Norquist's pledge on taxes, for example, then you have effectively said, I'm taking my marching orders according to the ideology that produced this pledge. The hell with what my constituents want, or what they need, or what's best for the state, or what's best for jobs. And so the fact of the matter is, a lot of this becomes the building and the strengthening of team, and that runs counter, totally contradictory to the vision and the principle of representative government that Madison and the others had. Because the fact of the matter is, we're not philosophers. We are not a nation of philosophers. But on the other hand, our election system functions as if we are. And the whole idea is that we're presenting ourselves to the voters as if we're independent philosophical thinkers governed by our conscience, by what's right.
Bill,
And the
how do you balance? And it has to be, I think, a delicate balance. How do you balance, say, and I think what you're describing is correct and good, but when your constituency, let's say your constituency is almost unanimous that they want everybody to be an evangelical, they want to pass a law that says everybody has to be an evangelical Christian.
Right.
And of course, if you oppose something like that, obviously you're not among the elect.
Well, I'm going to give you a concrete example of that in a minute, Bob.
Okay, great.
How do you do that? Well, first of all, you've got in your heart, you've got to know. I know that that's wrong. That is contradictory to what our system is about. It violates the principles on which this system was created, and it's wrong. And my job is to not give in to that, but to do everything I can do to change that, because I know it's wrong. And in good conscience, I can't do that. Let me give you an example. And this is a concrete example because it just happened over the last week. I mentioned that I've gotten political contributions for my campaign. 5 or 6 days ago, in the mail, I received a $300 check for my campaign from Jim Justice, who's the Democratic candidate for governor in West Virginia. And basically what he did in the cover letter was explain that he hoped that we would get a predominantly Democratic legislature, and that we would be able to take on some of the issues which West Virginia faces, namely jobs, economic growth, improving education, many of the things that I particularly agree with and have caused me to run. I took the check. I thought of it because it's got Jim Justice's name on it. I actually thought maybe this is one I ought to just keep in frame. This is kind of a remnant or a symbol or an artifact from this particular campaign that I can leave, and other people in future generations can see it and that kind of thing. And then I thought to myself, $300 is $300, and I can use that in the campaign. So I put it in the account. I basically deposited it in the checking account, campaign checking account. And then 3 days later, I got another letter from Jim Justice. And in that second letter was a request to sign a pledge to support the coal industry in West Virginia. And there were two parts to this pledge. The first one was to support the coal industry. The second one is to support the safety of coal miners. Obviously, nobody would not agree to do everything possible to support the safety of coal miners. But the fact of the matter is, there's much more to this pledge than that. Because if you support the coal industry, then what that means is you are willing to vote according to what the coal industry decides it needs for its benefit. The fact of the matter is, West Virginia needs to come up with alternatives to coal. The worst thing, and this is me speaking from the heart, the worst thing that I think can happen in West Virginia is that leaders convince people that coal is going to come back and be what it was in the 1950s, 40s, and 30s. It's not. It can't. Because in supporting coal, you are supporting an enterprise that runs counter to the viewpoint of the educated world, not just nation, world. The entire world is looking beyond the burning of fossil fuels. What West Virginia needs to do is begin to adjust to alternatives, to begin to invest in its people, and do everything that it can do to provide meaningful and well-paying alternatives to coal. It doesn't mean that we need to conduct a war on coal and do everything we can do to drive coal mines out of business. That's happening. It's kind of like the way the question of slavery was prior to the Civil War. Many people believed that slavery was dying anyway. You didn't need a war to end it. It was going to die of its own accord. It is appearing that coal is in that same situation. My feeling is the worst thing you can do is to suggest to desperate people that you're going to bring it back and that you're going to make it what it once was, because that's not possible. But even more important than that, you are sending a message to desperate people that the best thing they can do is to dig in their heels and refuse to look for alternatives to coal. That, I believe, is suicide. I think that's the very worst message that we can send to the people of West Virginia. And the fact of the matter is, in spite of the reality that the coal industry has done everything possible to pin the decline of coal on President Obama and his war on coal, the fact of the matter is the decline of coal was brought about principally by the industry itself, by the industry's decision to maximize the amount of coal mined by abandoning underground mining in favor of blowing the tops off mountains. And what that does, or did, is bring all of the citizens, all the people who lived in communities where coal is mined, into the equation. Because in blowing the tops off mountains, the industry has so polluted the air that it's making innocent people unconnected to coal sick, very sick. All of that is encompassed in a commitment or a pledge to support the coal industry. I can't support that. But the fact of the matter is, I took $300 of campaign money. And so the issue that I've had to wrestle with personally is, should I return that $300? If I don't endorse the pledge, then in effect, do I have the right to the $300? On the other hand, is the $300 ransom money, so-called, for my vote. So in reality, that's what I'm saying. It places the individual into a position of conflict. Because by definition, the nature of team, the principle of team, the power of team, runs contrary to the realities of representative democracy. And it seems to me that it pretty well dictates the kind of people that we've got to make every effort in the world to get into office. Because if candidates are willing to sign on to the highest bidder, as it were, then it seems to me our system is in trouble. I think that the system that Madison created, the kind of debate, the kind of honest interaction and conversation that Madison believed had to happen within representative government, is contradicted by the realities of team, by the realities of faction. That it's, very honestly, I see that as the reason why so many people in the 18th century were opposed to the concept of party. They didn't see party as the kind of diverse, pluralistic entity that our two-party system became on the national level. In the 18th century, when those folks heard the word party, they assumed faction. With faction, they assumed self-interest. With self-interest, they recognized that self-interest was contradictory to public interest. And that meant that if people were driven by self-interest, that meant that their own best interests could not be addressed or would not be addressed. It seems to me what Madison did and what the founders did was construct a system of political democracy designed to counter that. And the only way to counter it is to find a way to prevent faction from taking control of the political process. What we're seeing in today's political world is that faction is taking control of our political process. It's not faction as an ideological danger. It's faction driven by big money. It seems to me that what we're seeing in our political process is big money poured into our political campaigns to the point that what is happening is that votes and loyalty are being bought. There's no sense of commitment to it at all. If you take that money and you get elected and you don't vote according to the will of those who put up the money, then somebody else will get that money next time to run against you in the primary. Because ultimately, what is being rewarded here in terms of political longevity is loyalty, is your ability to commit to the team. And that means commit to the ideology of the team, which means that the issues that come before the team are not nearly as important as the ideology or the glue that holds the team together. That's what I think our political process is becoming. That's what I see the danger of. And very honestly, that's what I have chosen to run against. I put this in a piece and I posted it on our Facebook page a couple of days ago. I think I've entitled the piece, "The Power of Team When Good Guys Go Bad." And what I'm basically suggesting is we're not talking here about good guys and bad guys in terms of candidates. We're talking about good guys who get elected by people who think that they're voting for good guys, who find themselves enmeshed in a team and a set of expectations which they are expected to fulfill by voting the right way. And if they don't, their political career becomes history. That's what I think we're about. Bob, I appreciate your comments, and I don't know if I've made myself clear or whether it's too confusing, but I know that right now it's 59 minutes after, and I guess we need to sign off. Bob, thank you. I appreciate being back. I'm glad you're back. I want to thank folks for listening. Invite you back to our program. We'll be back on Monday, Lord willing, for the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Have a wonderful week, rest of the week. Enjoy the weather. Be kind to each other, and thank you.